So now we're going to talk about an aspect that's very important for any programming language. We call them conditionals. Conditionals. They are also known as branches. You'll see why in a minute. And what they allow a programming language to do is to simulate making a decision. And so let's go back and look at what we've done thus far and see the pieces that we have to pull this off. First of all, I'd like to note that when we do any basic program or coding or scripting, writing a function or script, we've been doing things like this thus far. So each statement, each line has been executing one after the other. All right, so we've executed line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, and so on and so forth. So if I wanted to represent this pictorially, that I'm going to do so like that's a statement, that's a statement, that's a statement, that's a statement, and just so on and so forth. So this is what we've been used to, is that programs, functions, scripts execute one statement after the other, right? And I also like to point out, let's say if I didn't want to write this like this and I wanted to group all this together, I group it together in something called code block. So when I write these rectangles, they may have one line of code in them, they may have 2 lines of code in them, or many, but this sort of represents a block of code, lines of code that are being executed sequentially one after the other. Okay. Now the other thing, so let's just call this statements, and or code blocks of code. Okay, so that's what I'll be referring to this as, and then they execute sequentially. All right. We've also talked about logical operators. Spent a considerable amount of time doing that. And once again, that's we can test for equality, inequality, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to. We can do negate something. We can do ands. We can do ors, which look like this, or this if we do short circuit. Ors look like this or this if we do short circuiting. We can do innies and alls. All of these return a true or a false. Okay? And so what conditionals do is we can determine which blocks of code we execute based on some logical test. Okay? That's what conditionals are about. We can, instead of having to execute code sequentially, right, we can now, with conditionals, determine which blocks of code we execute via some logical test, some true or false test. And the way it looks is that, we'll cover the law, we're executing these blocks of code, and now we put in some conditional, and we'll represent that flowchart style with a diamond. And if that condition is true, then we'll execute these blocks of codes, these statements. If that condition is false, then we may or may not execute these lines of code, these statements. Right? And then once our conditional is over, we will resume with the normal flow of our code. Okay? So statements, conditional, and then back to statements. And this conditional determines which one of these blocks of code we execute based on true or false. Now, we don't necessarily have to execute the code if we do false. This thing manifests itself in a few different ways, which is what I'm going to talk about next, the different ways that this manifests itself. Okay, so that's the basics. We have statements that execute sequentially. We have blocks of code. And then we have our logical operators that we've talked about, and we use those logical operators to make some kind of decision whether something is true or false. And based on that true or falseness of that statement, then it determines which blocks of code we execute next inside of that statement. Okay, so that's the fundamental. Now, let's go a little bit deeper here. It manifests itself in a couple of ways. Let's look at the basic. And so the conditionals manifest itself in the form of an if statement and the form of a switch statement. These are the two ways that we execute conditionals in MATLAB. The basic sort of core one is the if statement. The sort of tricked out one is the switch statement. So we're going to work and get some fundamental understanding of the if statement, and then at a later time, I'll do another video segment on the switch statement. All right. The if statement, in its basic form, is we do if, and then we have, and you don't necessarily have to put in parentheses, but I like to. We have some logical expression using our logical operators. That gets evaluated. If that is true, then execute this code block, this block of code. Right? That's the basic if statement. From a flowchart standpoint, looks like this. Well, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's say if I had some statements up here and some statements down here, blocks of code down here, then the way this looks is I've executed these statements here, and then I hit this if statement. If that logical expression is true, but I execute this code block. If it's false, I do nothing. Okay, and then I continue on with this statement here. Let's do it that way. All right. So I've got some statement here. Let's just say it's A equals B, or A equals 5. And I've got another statement here, B equals 6. So I would execute A equals 5. Then I would do this test. If some logical expression is true, then do this code block here, and then end. So if there's some logical expression that I'll test here, if it's true, I'll do the code block, and then I go this way. If it's false, then I do nothing. Okay, and then I execute this next block of code there. Okay, so that's the basic if statement. It allows me to make a test, and if that test is true, I do something. If that test is false, in this case, I do nothing. Version 2 of the if statement, once again, I'm going along, I'm executing some lines of code here, and then I decide to do this part of the if, this version of the if statement. If sublogical expression, I'll abbreviate EXP for expression now, then do this block of code. Else, in other words, if this is true, do this. Else, which is basically saying if this is false, then, and let's call this code block 1, and call this code block 2. That's saying if this logical expression, if this test is true, then do this block of code. Else, in other words, this test is false, then do this block of code. So the way this looks is, and then continue on with executing whatever blocks of code you have. B equals 6. Right now, just get the big picture of this. We're going to do many, many examples, and so don't just pick up the big picture and the basic understanding. So that says, if do that. If the logical expression is true, then do code, I'll abbreviate code block CB, do code block 1. Else, which means if it's not true, it is false. So this is the true part here. This is the false part here. Okay? So if it's false, then branch over here. This is where the term branching comes from, and do code block 2. And then continue on with the next blocks of code. Alright? So this is version 2 of the if statement. You actually do something if there's, with the else statement allows you to do something if the condition is false. Over in the first version, if the condition is false, you don't do anything. Over here in the second version, if the condition is false with this else statement here, it makes it gives you something to do if the condition is false. Okay. Next version, you're going along executing some line of code, and then if, that I'm going to abbreviate logical expression now LE, if some logical expression is true, you're going to do code block 1. Now this one is very interesting. The second version allows you to do a true or false. The next version allows you to do a series of true tests. So if this logical expression, and let's call it logical expression 1, if logical expression 1 is true, execute code block 1. Else, and then you do another if statement right there. Else if, and then you do another test. If logical expression 2 is true, do code block 2. And if neither one of those are true, then if both of those are false, then do code block 3 and then end. Okay? So this one has an else if in it. So if logical expression 1 is true, do code block 1. Else if, so you're doing another if statement here. This one's not true, but I want to make another test here. So I do else if logical expression 2 is true, do code block 2. Else, which means this one wasn't true, nor this one were true. So else, which is sort of like my default now, else, everything above me is false, so then do this one. Okay? And so, and then, once again, once it ends there, then you can go about doing some other statements. Okay? Alright, so let's go in here. A equals 5. Then we do some conditional here. So this is the first one. If it's true, I'm going to execute code block 1. So block of code, some series of statements. If that one's not true, then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to need to erase this line in order to get this all in here. If that was not true, then make another decision. And if that one's true, execute code block 2. If that one is false, then execute code block 3. And once all this is over, they go on and continue to execute in this case B equals 6 other lines of the program. So look at this flow control. Look at how this branches off. This is why it's called branches. I execute that. I make a decision. This is my first, this is logical expression 1. And I make this test. If it's true, I do code block 1, right? If it's not true, then I come over here and I make another if statement. I do logical, this is logical expression 2 right here, right? This is logical expression 1 right here. Then I make this, I do this logical expression. If it's true, then I do code block 2. If it's false, then I do, then both of them are false, and then I'll do code block 3. So this is how this one looks, okay? And so those are the sort of 3 basic ones. Understanding how to do just a basic if statement, an if else, and then an if else if else. Now, this thing can get tricked out many different ways. You can put as many else ifs in here as you want to. Okay? And then you can not either, this else statement is optional. You may or may not have this else statement, right? So this version over here can take on many different forms depending on what problem you're trying to solve, which gives the computer the semblance that it is actually thinking and making decisions. And so you have to figure out how you want this to work. And we'll see this play out in a lot of different examples. But for right now, these are the basics of the conditional and the branches, specifically the if statement. Get the general idea, and we will continue to work to increase your understanding. This video is going to go over some basic examples of the if statement. As we discussed in the board part of this lecture, we've grown accustomed to the flow of our programs going from statement to statement. So A, B, C equals A plus B. And the flow of our program going from line 1 to line 2 to line 3. And what conditionals allow us to do is to make decisions and alter the flow. So let me put a condition statement in here, and let's just start with the basic. It looks like this. If, and then I put some condition in here. Now, you don't have to put them in parentheses. It's just parentheses are for emphasis. But let's say we go if A is greater than B. In fact, let's start off a little more simple than that. Let's say if A equals 5, then if A equals 5, let's say instead of having, let's say D equals A plus, or let's say just D equals A, okay? And then we end it. Okay? And so that this program runs, so we can see this. Let's say D equals 9 up there. Okay. So we've done some basic code here, and we come down here and say E equals B plus 10. Okay. So we've got some lines of code up here, and then we have this conditional statement that's going to make a decision. If A equals 5, then D is going to get assigned the value of A. If A does not equal 5 and this isn't true, then D is going to retain its original value of 9, okay, which then will affect the value of E. When we run this, and once again I've saved this already, so it's not going to ask me to save. When we run this, this is the following happens. You see here that A equals 5, B equals 6, C equals A plus B, D equals 9. So those 4 lines of code execute. Then you get to the if statement, and it says if A equals 5, then execute the statement D equals A. Well, then we ask ourselves, does A equal 5? Does this expression evaluate to true? If it does, if that expression on line 6 evaluates to true, then execute the code inside the if statement, between the if and the end. Execute this code here, D equals A. Right? Well, yes, this is true. A does equal 5, so D equals A gets executed, as you can see over here. D equals 5. And then you end, and then continue execution of your other statements in your script here. E equals D plus 10. So D got assigned 5 here, so E equals D plus 10, which is 15. Okay. Now, what if this statement were not true? What if it were false? So let's say instead of A equals 5, let's say is A greater than 5? Well, this is false. No, A is not greater than 5. So now let's clear this. CLC clears that. And then run this again. And now you see the line 7 never executed. Never happened because this was false. A equals 5. A greater than 5 is false. So that never executed. And so you just go E equals 19, and D's value was never changed to 5 because of the fact that this was a false statement. So if statements give you the power to make a true-false decision, which is very big and very important because you can do a lot of different things with this. So this is the basic version of it. Now let's add some things to it and go to sort of version 2, the if-else version here. And what I want to do is I'm just going to modify this one. So if A is greater than 5, execute that. If that's false, else say that D equals B. Okay? So now, in the first statement, if it were false, nothing happened. Now, in this statement, if this is false, now I'm going to do D equals B. So I've added another level of decision making here. And then I end and continue to execute. So let's run this and see what happens. Once again, we'll clear our command window. So now when I execute this, I anticipate, since this is false, then this statement on line 7 is not going to go, but the statement on line 9 will go. So I click that, and sure enough, line 9 executed because D equals 6, and now E equals 16. Okay? So this allows me to do something not just when my condition is true, but it also allows me to do something when my condition is false. Okay, so that's sort of version 2 of the if statement. Version 3 of the if statement allows me to make multiple decisions, right? So I can say if A is greater than 5, D equals B. I can say else if A is equal to 5, excuse me, if A is greater than 5, D equals A. Else, if A is equal to 5, D equals B. Else, D gets C. Okay? So now I'm able to make multiple layered decisions. If A is greater than 5, D equals B. Else, if A is equal to 5, excuse me, I said it again. If A is greater than 5, D equals A. Else, if A is equal to 5, D equals B. Else, in other words, if neither one of these are true, then my sort of default statement is else D now gets the value of C. Okay? So now, now I'm going to clear in, and I'm going to execute this. Now we anticipate this is false, so then it comes down and makes this test. This is true, so this is going to happen. And once that selection happens, the if statement is ended, and you come down. Once you make one of these choices, the if statement is ended, and then you come down to the next statements. So when I execute this, you see that since a is equal to 5, a is not greater than 5, so that's false. So then you come down to this one on line 8. You see that a is equal to 5, so you execute line 9, which is d equals b, which is 6. So d equals 6. And then now you don't even do this part here. You just skip down here and do equals 16. Okay? Now, if I go up here and change the game a bit and say a equals 7, right? And then I clear this. Then when I execute this, I anticipate that line 6 is going to be true here. So then line 7 will execute, and then this will end, and we'll come down here to line 14. So when I execute this, sure enough, it says here d equals 7, which is the execution of line 7, and then now e equals 17. Okay? And just to be complete, let's change the game again here and make a less than 5. Let's say it's 3. Now this one's going to be false. Line 6 is going to be false. Line 8 is going to be false. And so the default or the else part will execute, and now d will equal c, which in that case will be, let's make a equal to 2, so we'll get a different value. So this now, c will be the value 8, so e should be 18. So click that, and sure enough, 6 is false, 8 evaluates to false, so then you go else, d equals c, c is 6 plus 2 is 8, and then now e equals 18. So that's a basic introduction to the if statement. You can do many, 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 many things with the if statement. In fact, let me just do an example here to sort of bring it on home, something that you're very familiar with. Let me get rid of this script and clear the window here. Now, let's do something. Let's say if I have a variable called grade. Let's say grade. No, let's not say grade. Let's say average. Average. And the average equals a 90. Say that. And let's just say I wanted to assign a letter grade based on a student's average. So I can say if average is greater than or equal to 90. Oops. If average is greater than or equal to 90, then grade equals the character A. Else if the average, and let's do this, if the average is less than 90 and the average is greater than or equal to 80, then the grade, variable grade gets B. Else if the average is less than 80 and the average is greater than or equal to 70, then grade gets C. Else if the average is less than 70 and the average is greater than or equal to 60, grade gets D. Else, if none of those are true, else grade gets F. And then we end. Okay? This will assign a letter grade based on a standard 90, 80, 70, 60 scale. Okay, and since we didn't suppress here, it's just going to give us the grades when we get them, right? So let's add some breakpoints here. Let's not do breakpoints. Let's just look at this run. So if I execute this, average is 90. So this first condition on line 3 holds true. So grade should be printed out as A. So I do that, grade equals A, right? If I change my average to, I don't know, 85, clear this, execute. Now I have an input error. Oh, whoops. I was thinking and I typed it in wrong. So let's do this. There we go. All right. You notice how I didn't get the error the first time I ran it because the code stopped running when I got to there. But this time, line 3 was false, and so the code jumped down and tried to execute here, and then I had the word and instead of the ampersand. So that's why I got an error. So now let's clear this. Run it again. So average equals 85. All right, again, now my grade equals B because line 3 is false, but line 5 is true because the average is less than 90, but greater than or equal to 80. Okay, and I can go on and on with this. If I do 75, you see I get a grade of C. If I do 65 or any value in between that range, let's clear this again, I get the grade of D. And if I do something lower than 60, I don't know, 35, clear this, I get the grade of F. So this, if you can grasp what's happening here, you're well on your way to understanding the if statement.